There's a reason people still talk about Stalker almost 2 decades later, and it isn't just Stalker 2. It isn't just the story, or the shooting, or even the bleak atmosphere Chernobyl's exclusion zone. It's something deeper, the sense that the zone is alive. When you stumble into a random firefight, when a pack of mutants drags you into chaos, when rival factions clash just over a hill, it feels unscripted, unpredictable, and emergent. That illusion GSC has given us is called A-Life. A-Life was the system that was supposed to make the zone more than just another video game full of scripted events. It was supposed to make it feel like its own organism, like they described it in Clear Sky. Dynamic, dangerous, and full of stories the player doesn't control. And here's another little thing about A-Life. It's also one of the most over-promised and under-delivered systems in PC gaming history. GSC Game World first started hyping A-Life all the way back in 2001, years before Shadow of Chernobyl even released. They pitched it as a revolutionary AI that would make their open world live and breathe. In reality, the system that shipped was far simpler, and while it created some amazing emergent moments, it never matched the hype until Stalker Anomaly came out. The massive fan-made mod pack that virtually fixed this system and made it realized into what we all know and love today. And now, with Stalker 2, it seems history has repeated itself. GSC didn't just promise A-Life, they promised their upgraded A-Life 2.0. And once again, kind of like your girlfriend, players found something much smaller than advertised. The word A-Life still sells the vision, it sells the dream, but the reality hasn't caught up. Today I'm going to tell you every single thing I've learned about A-Life over this week, and it took a ton of research, and this video is going to really get into the weeds of what A-Life is, where the term came from, how it worked in the original trilogy, how modders perfected it with Anomaly, why a free mod outdoes Stalker 2 right now, what's still missing, and why this system matters so much to the soul of the series. So sit back, relax, and let me take you on a journey through what A-Life truly is. To understand A-Life, we need to go back before Stalker even had that name. In 2001, GSC Game World was a small Ukrainian studio working on a prototype called Oblivion Lost. They had no reputation, no major publisher, and they needed something to stand out. At the time, shooters like Halo, Half-Life, and Medal of Honor were dominating. They had pretty strong AI, but their worlds were static. Nothing persisted beyond the level-designed scripts. GSC wanted to sell something a little bit different. That's when they started talking about a system they called A-Life. Way back at E3 2002, they pitched it as revolutionary. Stalkers with daily routines, mutants that hunted and ate, factions waging war over territories whether you were there or not. It sounded radical compared to the heavily scripted shooters of the day. Now I'll tell you the important part. At that point, A-Life was more of a marketing term than a real feature. The name itself was borrowed from academic research into artificial life simulations on computer science and biology. By slapping that label on their idea, GSC made their prototype sound advanced and futuristic, even though it was just a concept at the time. It worked. The pitch got attention from the press and helped land a publishing deal with THQ. From that moment on, A-Life became the brand identity of Stalker. But when Shadow of Chernobyl finally released in 2007, after years of cuts and delays, the grand simulation they promised wasn't really there. What players got instead was a stripped down version built on radius-based activation, kind of like what Stalker 2 does today. NPCs and mutants didn't persist across the whole zone, they only existed if you were close enough to turn them on. And yet, even in its reduced form, A-Life delivered something special. The zone felt unpredictable. You'd stumble into firefights that weren't scripted. Mutants would attack stalkers without being programmed to do so. The world felt like it had a pulse. So even though A-Life never matched the 2001 pitch, it still gave players something no other shooter had at the time. And because of that, the myth of A-Life stuck. Players took a marketing slogan and turned it into a legendary feature. And in a way, that's exactly what's happening again with Stalker 2. Big promises, a smaller reality, but enough potential that fans are holding on to the dream. In Shadow of Chernobyl, A-Life boiled down to a mix of activation bubbles and smart scripting. The zone was divided into sections. NPCs and mutants only existed if the player was near enough to activate them. Beyond that radius, they were essentially frozen. But inside that bubble, there was enough freedom to create unpredictability. Stalkers patrolled between camps, mutants roamed, and factions occasionally clashed. None of it was rigid allegedly scripted, so you could walk into a firefight that wasn't staged just for you. It wasn't a grand ecosystem, but it felt like one, and that was enough to make players believe the zone had a life of its own. When Clear Sky launched in 2008, GSC tried to raise the stakes with faction wars. The idea that duty, freedom, bandits, and others would fight for control across the zone, bases would change hands, and the player could tip the balance. In theory, this was the natural evolution of A-Life. In practice, it was pretty messy and got a little bit repetitive, having to run back and forth to defend certain areas you already liberated. The system was buggy, NPCs got stuck, and battles often failed to resolve properly. Instead of a dynamic war, it felt unstable and unpredictable in the wrong ways. Still, it was a bit of a step in the right direction conceptually. Clear Sky proved that GSC wasn't content with static patrols. They wanted A-Life to evolve into a system of systemic conflict, even if they couldn't quite make it work yet. By the time Call of Pripyat came out in 2009, GSC scaled back. Instead of pushing new features, they refined what already worked. A-Life in COP wasn't revolutionary, but it was stable. NPC patrols made sense, mutants acted consistently, and encounters felt believable. It was less ambitious than Clear Sky, but it avoided the chaos of broken faction wars. For many players, this was the sweet spot, and this is what I'm kind of hoping they'll get to with Stalker 2. COP delivered a zone that felt alive and dangerous without constantly reminding you it was built on a fragile engine, even though it felt obvious when you were playing the game. And then came Anomaly. Anomaly isn't an official game. It's a community-built overhaul mod that turned the old X-Ray engine into something far beyond what GSC ever achieved. It's free, it's standalone, and for many players, it's the definitive Stalker experience. And before I get the Stalker purists on my back for even making such a claim, I'm going to tell you why. Factions in Anomaly actually fight for territory. Squads move across the map, capture outposts, and shift front lines dynamically even if you're not there. NPCs act like survivors. They loot bodies, heal allies, repair gear, and genuinely live in the zone instead of waiting for you to show up. Mutants have layers and migration patterns. They can expand or shrink based on activity. Some even follow predator-prey behavior. The economy reflects the state of the zone. Traders' stock change based on who controls territory, creating real scarcity and consequence. And technically, Anomaly solves the biggest problem, which was performance. It uses a smart switch distance system, running full AI close to you and lightweight simulations further away. That way the zone feels persistent without breaking your PC. The reason I'm calling this the true Stalker experience is because this is what GSC always promised in the first place. So if you're gonna come at me and say this sandbox element was never supposed to be as refined as people expect in Stalker 2 because the original games only had an archaic version of it, is not a testament to what A-Life is supposed to be. It was a fact that the intended system failed, and it took hardworking modders to fix it and truly bring Stalker to life. The result is a world that finally feels what GSC promised back in 2001. Players have been sharing stories of stumbling into abandoned outposts, mutant packs migrating through areas, or traders running dry because their faction lost ground. Anomaly may not be official, but it is the realization of A-Life's potential. It proves the dream does work if it's executed properly. And that, of course, brings me to the uncomfortable comparison, because right now, Anomaly, a free mod built by fans on a 20-year-old engine, delivers a more convincing A-Life than I feel Stalker 2 ever will. In Anomaly, factions really fight wars across the map. In Stalker 2, the entire world just feels kind of empty and boring. In Anomaly, the stalkers scavenge, heal, and persist in the world. In Stalker 2, NPCs often spawn around you and despawn when you leave. In Anomaly, mutants have layers, migration, and feeding behaviors. In Stalker 2, they mostly exist as combat triggers and scripted events. In Anomaly, the economy shifts with the state of the zone. In Stalker 2, traders feel static, unaffected by the world. And most importantly, Anomaly remembers. Battles leave aftermaths. You'll find corpses, abandoned gear, and real evidence of the events that happened without you. In Stalker 2, the zone often resets, leaving absolutely no trace of what you've done. In my opinion, this is a brutal comparison. A fan-made mod built on ancient tech feels more alive than a modern AAA release built in Unreal Engine 5. That doesn't mean Stalker 2 can't improve, but it does mean GSC is once again behind its own community. Here's the thing. Stalker wasn't the only game trying to simulate something like a living ecosystem, but what makes A-Life distinct is how it balanced atmosphere and unpredictability rather than chasing full-blown simulations. Let's look at other games that approach similar ideas. Here's looking at Far Cry 2. Released in 2008 right after Stalker, it tried to make the African savannah feel alive with roaming patrols, checkpoint skirmishes, and fire that spread dynamically. You drive down a road and suddenly run into a convoy you weren't expecting, or a grass fire would cut off your escape. It gave the impression of chaos, but it lacked persistence. Patrols respawned and the world reset constantly. It felt reactive in the moment, but when you zoomed out, it didn't have that long-term systemic consequences players associated with Stalker. There's this other game called Mountain Blade. From the very first game to Bannerlord, it's built around a world simulation where lords, armies, and caravans move independently. Wars unfold whether you're involved or not. Towns change hands, armies get wiped out, and it's far more persistent than Stalker. But it's also abstracted. You don't get that boots on the ground chaos of suddenly hearing gunfire out in the distance. Kenshi is another extreme example. In Kenshi, every squad of NPCs exists in the world, living or dying based on hunger, injuries, or faction wars. Settlements can be destroyed or abandoned. The player is just another actor in a truly persistent simulation. I don't think there was a real downside to this game, even though I haven't played Kenshi myself. It sounds pretty fleshed out in that they got it working pretty nicely, but somebody in the comments section down below tell me how it really works and if there's anything actually disappointing about this simulation system that Kenshi has. So compared to these, Stalker's A-Life definitely sits much smaller. It never reached the systemic complexity of Kenshi or Dwarf Fortress, but it also wasn't just smoke and mirrors like Far Cry 2. Its power came from tone, limited simulation, but layered with unpredictability, sound design, and atmosphere that made you believe the zone was alive. That's what made A-Life unique. It was about how unpredictability fed into immersion, and that's exactly what fans expect with Stalker 2. Not necessarily the most advanced AI in gaming, but the kind of emergent unpredictability that makes the zone feel dangerous and untamed. So, where does Stalker 2 actually stand right now? When the game launched in late 2024, players quickly realized that A-Life 2.0 was not even there. And right now, instead of a truly persistent simulation, the game relies heavily on a player bubble. NPCs and mutants are mostly spawned in around you, then despawned when you left. It feels a little bit more like stage props being set up for your arrival, not a world that exists independently. The result right now is a zone that looks alive but doesn't behave alive. Faction wars are definitely not unfolding across the map. Mutants definitely are not roaming dynamically. Traders aren't responding to the world conditions. Everything feels reactive rather than persistent. Now, this is disappointing, but it's also kind of deja vu. Back in 2001, GSC pitched A-Life as a grand simulation, and the shipped version was a pared down illusion. In 2021, GSC promised A-Life 2.0, and in 2024, history repeats itself yet again. The zone feels static, and we all noticed. To their credit, GSC has been patching aggressively. Updates in early 2025 improved NPC behaviors, stalkers now loot bodies more reliably, assist allies in fights, and move in more varied groups. Mutant AI has been tweaked to be less predictable. The spawn radius has been expanded, reducing those immersion-breaking pop-in encounters. Patch 1.5 even reconnected persistent logic across the world, so NPCs could theoretically exist outside of the player's bubble, at least in a lightweight form. These are real improvements. The game today feels more alive than it did at launch, but the system is still very fragile. Battles don't ripple through the zone the way they do in Anomaly. The economy doesn't change meaningfully, and too often you can still feel the strings being pulled behind the curtain. In other words, Stalker 2's A-Life isn't dead, but it isn't alive either. So what is exactly missing? What would take A-Life in Stalker 2 to actually meet fans' expectations? Not just A-Life, but A-Life 2.0 like GSC has always promised. The biggest gap is persistence. Players want the zone to remember what happens. If duty and freedom clash miles away, there should be bodies, abandoned gear, or shift in territory when you arrive later. Right now, too many events reset or leave no trace at all. Second is faction dynamics. Anomaly proved how powerful this can be. Factions need to feel like they're actually struggling for dominance, dispatching squads, raiding bases, and expanding influence. Without that, the zone just feels static. Third is mutant behavior. Mutants need layers, feeding cycles, and migration patterns. They should feel like actual wildlife, not just scripted encounters. Fourth is the economy. Traders and resources should reflect the state of the zone. If a faction loses ground, their gear should dry up. If mutants overrun a region, food and medical supplies should become scarce. The economy should be tied to the world, not isolated from it. And finally, there's atmosphere and aftermath. A-Life doesn't just need mechanics, it needs storytelling through the environment. Hearing distant firefights, picking up radio chatter about battles, or finding a burnt out aftermath of a mutant attack and sell the fantasy of a living world. Right now, those touches just aren't in Stalker 2. Players aren't asking for a Kenshi level simulation, they're asking for unpredictability and consequence. The feeling that the zone is moving with or without them, and that their choices matter within that ecosystem. If GSC can't deliver that themselves, then who can? The answer is the same as it's been for 15 years. The modding community. The old X-Ray engine proved this with mods like Call of Chernobyl, Dead Air, and especially Anomaly. Modders dug into GSC's fragile framework and rebuilt A-Life into something robust. They extended spawn ranges and added faction logic, built entire economy systems, and essentially created the living zone GSC never could. Stalker 2 is already seeing the same momentum, and I couldn't be more excited for that. Mods like Shay's Living Zone is an example worth highlighting because it has quickly become one of the most ambitious community-driven overhauls for Stalker 2 so far. Right now, the official SDK doesn't actually let modders touch the core of A-Life systems directly. No AI overhauls, no deep simulation rewrites, no fundamental changes to spawns or faction logic. Shay even puts a clear disclaimer front and center. This isn't because they don't want to, it's because those hooks aren't open in the SDK yet. But instead of waiting, they've pushed the limits on what can be done with the current tools, creating something that feels like a preview of the fully realized A-Life we're all waiting for. Shay's version reworks core systems like spawn timing and pacing, making NPC activity in the zone feel more natural and less predictable. It overhauls event triggers and layer mechanics, creating a more believable population dispersal that better reflects faction lore. Patrols can now be interacted with, traded with, or encountered in ways that feel more alive. And factions have distinct behaviors. For example, Monolith soldiers never rest, while freedom fighters are now coded as heavy smokers to match their laid-back lifestyle in the zone. There's also a progression-based unlock system baked in, so the zone evolves the longer you play. Squad sizes shift, new NPC types show up, and patrols become more varied and immersive. The mod even manages to extend the offline simulation, so NPCs don't just freeze at the edge of your render distance. They keep moving, patrolling, and fighting, which means the zone doesn't pause just because you're not looking at it. Combine this with the compatibility for other major overhauls like Modular Hard Mode 2 or Desolation, and the experience becomes layered in a way that feels like a natural evolution of what GSC first promised back in 2001. In short, Shay's A-Life mod is proof of what players want and will build, a deeper simulation even before the official tools are even ready. In this way, the community has already proven they can surpass the developers. Anomaly is the ultimate example. If the SDK gives them enough freedom, expect someone to build Anomaly for Stalker 2, a version of the zone that truly feels alive. GSC may or may not get A-Life right on their own, but with the SDK, the fans almost certainly will. At this point, you may be wondering, why does this matter so much? Why is everybody obsessed with A-Life instead of just enjoying Stalker 2 as a shooter with a cool setting? The answer is simple. I could argue without A-Life, Stalker loses its identity. Plenty of shooters can give you tight gunplay, plenty of open worlds can give you big maps and scripted missions, but only Stalker promises a zone that feels unpredictable, hostile, and emergent. Without A-Life, the zone is just a stage set for you. With A-Life, it becomes a character, the most important character in the entire game. It's what makes your war stories different from mine. It's what makes the zone feel alive rather than a theme park. That's why players care so much. That's why the disappointment with Stalker 2's launch was so sharp. And that's why there's still hope. Because if A-Life finally delivers, it elevates the whole game from just another open world shooter to something irreplaceable for years on end. Back in 2001, GSC pitched A-Life as a groundbreaking simulation. What we got in 2007 was smaller, but it worked because it created atmosphere and unpredictability. Clear Sky stumbled, Call of Pripyat stabilized, and then the community took over with Anomaly. Fans proved the dream could actually work. Fast forward to 2024 and the cycle repeats. Stalker 2 launched with another overhyped A-Life system that didn't deliver. Patches are improving it, but the real hope is in the SDK and the modding community themselves. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that GSC talks the talk, but modders walk the walk. A-Life isn't just something that doesn't matter and is something everybody's just complaining about. It is the zone. Without it, Stalker 2 is just another shooter. With it, it becomes something no other series can even match. And that's why people care so much, because when A-Life finally works, Stalker stops being a game and starts feeling like a place. So I hope you kind of got my perspective on this, because it is important to me and many fans of the zone. This isn't something that shouldn't work because it didn't work well in the old games. This is something that should work even better. It's 2025, man. We gotta get going here. We gotta get a simulated zone. It's what's gonna make the game as replayable as Anomaly. People are still playing that game. like 18 years later. And it's what I want for Stalker 2. So thank you very much for watching to the end of the video. Hit the like button, consider subscribing. I'm gonna make a lot more videos like this, very conceptual, but also cover the news so you guys don't miss anything. Thanks again. Have yourselves a very nice day.